Mandalorian versus Andor. It has been over 3 weeks since Andor changed Star Wars, and Mandalorian Season 3 is on the horizon, bound to bring new action and adventure in the Star Wars galaxy. But that does leave us with many questions on how Andor could influence the show, or if it even will. So we brought in Justin from EckhartsLadder to break it down.
May the Force.
The Force.
The Force will be with you. Always.
Welcome to Star Wars Uplink, your place for everything Star Wars gaming, the TV shows, and the movies. Each week we dive deep into 2 topics from the galaxy far, far away. I'm your host, Sage Goodwin. As always, I'm joined by Sydney Laurel.
Hello.
And we're also joined by Justin from EckhartsLadder. How you doing, man?
Good. Thank you for having me on. It's an honor. This is the first podcast other than my own I've done in quite a while, so it's nice.
Yeah, I was looking back, and I think the last time we had you on the podcast was like 2 years ago. It was before Squadrons came out.
Oh, no.
That's not what we're talking about in this episode. In this episode, we're talking about Jedi Survivor. We're talking about Andor and how it compares and its place in the Star Wars galaxy and how it might influence things going forward. So let's jump right in.
Just you reconsider playing that message for him.
I'm glad we delayed the recording of the episode because it's perfect timing. And we got the first trailer for Jedi Survivor.
It was a good trailer. I kind of don't know how I feel. The game looks great. The game is going to be great. I have no idea what it's about, though.
Yeah, same. We were just trying to hypothesize like who this character in the tube thing is, and
the character in the tube.
Yeah, and what is he gonna do? Like, what's his place in all of this?
Yeah.
So,
he definitely seems like he has some kind of connections, at least towards like the later half of the trailer.
Yeah, he looks. I mean, people have pointed out that he definitely looks like he's wearing High Republic robes because he's got the gold on him, which is definitely possible. He talks about being, I think he says something about, I've only watched it once or twice now, so he talks about being betrayed, so I kind of wonder whether maybe he went rogue in his time, and he got kind of, I mean, the Jedi aren't going to kill people, so maybe they threw him in that...
Chop his arm off, put him in a tube.
Yeah, they threw him in the tube, and that's kind of their, put him in the solitary zone for a bit, and the Jedi are gone, so he gets forgotten about. So that'd be my guess right now, but I mean, who knows? It looks like Cal might have his lightsaber at the end because he's got a big old claymore looking thing. So
I both like and hate how little story they gave us. One, on the one hand, as like just a enjoyer of video games and someone who's excited about it, I love that it was not super spoiler heavy. You can see that they're just improving the gameplay because everything that about the game looks so solid and so smooth. But on the other hand, like they're just giving us enough little nods to where it's okay, interesting. Well, we know that the guy in the tube is going to be a big part of the story of it. It seems like the vibe I'm getting with at least is like they're going to implement more of like the bounty hunter side of things, because it definitely seems, as soon as those guys showed up, I'm like, oh hey, look, it's like the bounty hunter mission in Fallen Order.
Yeah, that's what it reminded me of too, where he gets captured and gets on that ship, and you get the bounty hunters chasing you throughout the game. That's a good call. Yeah, I kind of wish they'd shown more. Kind of like I wanted to see what gameplay changes they'd made.
Yeah, because it looks very similar right now to Fallen Order.
Yeah, it does. And I don't think it will be. There's definitely going to be more enemy variety, which is good. We see the battle droids and those they're not dark troopers, but the early DS security droids, I think they're called, that's in Rebels. It looks good. I wish there was more. I wish they had either went really cinematic with it, kind of like the first trailer did, but given us a bit more story, or given us kind of like an uncut gameplay sequence to show off some new things. But it's still, that's me being picky. It looks good.
I find it interesting too, just the time frame that is going to come out in, because this is coming out March 17th, and it's coming out before stuff like EA Play would even be, because usually we'd see like a reveal for the story side of things, either like Star Wars Celebration or the Game Awards, and then we'd see like the gameplay 15-minute segment on something like EA Play, and we're just going to get this game in what, January, February, March?
Yeah,
3 months from now?
not even.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we thought it was originally going to come out this year, so I can understand that they pushed it back further, and they may not have as much time as they originally planned on to get all the marketing stuff out. But it was very surprising when I heard rumors that it was coming out so soon. It definitely looks like they're leaning, at least from this small bit of stuff that we've seen, they're leaning in towards of like the same but better. So the parkour and everything like that, the puzzles, they seem to be larger in scope. Everything seems much more pretty than that game. Hopefully, so I remember when I first played Fallen Order, like my game crashed like 7 times in the first hour that I played. There was many times where I would just fall through. I hit one of the computer consoles, and then all of a sudden, like I just kept on falling infinitely.
Oh no.
But I think that's just Unreal Engine 4, really.
Yeah. The other thing I'm curious about is that random character we get a look at. He's got a blaster. Cal, I think, says his last name. I didn't catch it.
Yeah.
I'm wondering. I don't know if you guys think that's going to be co-op or what the deal with that is, but that was definitely interesting.
Right.
He's definitely a high fidelity character model. Like he's very clear. Like every time that you see him, like it must be some like recognizable actor because his like, very well modeled for sure.
Right.
I would like the idea that it is like you could do couch co-op, but I think that's just such a drastic change for so many different things.
Yeah.
But I definitely see him as maybe we can change in between these two characters, or maybe it's the gameplay is okay, you can do like specific combos in specific story segments where he is with you, maybe.
Right.
Bode is his name. Bode. According to YouTube closed captions. Again, that could be
Who knows?
Yeah. So like one of the pre-order bonuses that was leaked was a blaster, and everyone assumed it's Cal's blaster because you can see in the last trailer he does have one on his hip.
Yeah.
But it's possible, it seems, that it could belong to the other guy.
What did you think about the little tiny side guards?
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, so they talked to in the Steam page that was actually set live a bit early. I think he's now officially live, about how there's going to be different styles of lightsaber combat. So the way he's swinging it, that looks like it's definitely going to be sort of a heavier.
Yeah.
Because I always felt like one of the weaker parts of the last game was the fact that, like, I really enjoy. It's essentially like a Souls game, and I really enjoyed it. I played on the hardest difficulty, and I had a great time.
You legend.
It's kind of funny, and this is sort of the point. It actually gets a little easier when you play it on the harder difficulty because you kind of realize to beat the game, you really got to play it the way it wants you to play. So like when you fight the what's her name, second sister, is it second sister?
I think it's the second sister's the big one, and then,
right. So
yeah,
when you fight her at the end, for example, there's really only one way to do it. You have to learn her pattern. When she does, the certain attack, you got to dodge. When you do something, you got to block. And that gets to be a bit kind of lame, in my opinion. If you play a game like Elden Ring, which is very much in the same fashion, very difficult. You're meant to die a lot. You get a save right before the boss. You get the health things. The difference is, yes, the bosses are difficult, and there are moves that you've got to treat a certain way, but you could ultimately fight them in different ways. So like you can use a really fast weapon or a magic or a really powerful weapon. That was missing from Fallen Order 1. So my hope is that in the second game, when they're showing us they've got these different types of lightsabers, that there'll be a bit more freedom for how you can, beat the bosses and stuff.
Yeah, because that's definitely one of the big drawbacks of Fallen Order was just the variety of boss combat. Like everything, I mean, they each had their own different feeling, but there wasn't a huge lot of like development with the combat styles. Like the combat was great, it was solid for what it was, but it didn't, when you play it consistently or you do play it on like a more casual difficulty, you can kind of see the separation between like what they want you to do and how easily you can just hack and slash your way through it. Like they almost want to be Dark Souls, but they know that they can't necessarily be Dark Souls.
Yeah.
But going back to Survivor, what do you think about kind of the time frame that they're playing around with? Because we see mentions of that we see the battle droids. We also see a variety of different locations all in this time period after Order 66.
I'm not sure when this is taking place. Like I think it's...
Is it 4 or 5 years after the first game?
Yeah, so I think that kind of puts it close to Andor, maybe a little bit before, because Cal is just a kid when Order 66 happens.
Yeah.
So I can't remember exactly. So, there's an 18-year period between that and the original trilogy. So 5 years plus however long. You're around like Kenobi / Andor time. So that's interesting. I don't think they're going to do a lot of tie-ins. It seems to me like the battle droids are probably going to be kind of similar to what you see in like Rebels, where they go to it, or even the Bad Batch, where they go to an old facility or whatever. And there's something in there he needs.
Yeah. I think so. And I think, too, one, it's showing that, hey, parts of the galaxy, they still use the battle droids. Like, the Empire isn't fully omnipotent yet. There are still, like, these pockets where they're still using the droid technology. I think that's part of it, like the visual setting storytelling of just, hey, we're in this location. They aren't using the droids, or they aren't using stormtroopers fully yet. I looked it up. 14 BBY is when Fallen Order takes place, and this will be 5 years after that. 9 BBY.
Yeah, that's the same as Kenobi. So Andor is 4 years after that, and then obviously 5 years after that is, or maybe Andor is 5. I can't remember what year Andor is. But anyways,
it's 5 BBY. Andor is.
Yeah, so it's the same time as Kenobi, a few years before Andor. So interesting time for sure.
And I think we're seeing bits and pieces of that time period. I mean, so many of us want more of that time period just because it's so fascinating. It's like, man, the Republic lost, and what does it mean for the galaxy? We see a very like personal side of things with Andor, and I think that's really good. But I think it's going to be nice to see what a Jedi looks like, especially during this time period where like, they're hunting down the Jedi. Everyone's on the run. I mean, Cal looks like he's seen some stuff.
He's seen some stuff for sure.
I saw this one thing. It's like me at the beginning of 2022, me at the end of 2022.
Oh, no.
Yeah. He's got the beard, too. It's a good look.
Nice look.
It also looks like we might be seeing some Coruscant, too. But that's just my hope. Anytime I see some kind of city planet with neon in the background, I think Coruscant.
I would definitely like to, like, that's another kind of complaint I had about the last game, is it felt like it was kind of just different nature environments each time.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, the rocky planet, the jungle planet. It's like, I want to, even when you go to, I forget the name of it, you go to that one planet where there was people, they're all gone now. So it would be nice to kind of have a bit of variation there.
It's crazy. March is going to be insane.
It's going to be very busy for us, for all of us. Yeah, because we'll have the tail end of the Bad Batch, I guess. We'll have Mando. We'll have the book, the Jedi Survivor book, and then the game itself. And I'm sure there's something I'm forgetting, but it's going to be, totally insane.
What is it? I think some new High Republic stuff comes out around the same time. I question whether or not the idea to have all of the things drop on Wednesday is a good decision. I felt that most like clearly when Tales of the Jedi came out, and I'm just gonna start feeling that even more now that like we're getting so much.
Yeah. I've complained about the date for me is, Wednesday. It's all right. I just wish they'd release it at a better time.
Yeah.
Because like the way it works now, it's not convenient for anyone. Like I'm not, because it comes out. The shows come out at 12 Eastern time. So I'm far, or 12 Pacific time rather.
Yeah.
I'm far on the East Coast of Canada, so it's 4:00 for me. But it's not just inconvenient for me. Like if you're in Europe, it's early in the morning. Even in the Pacific, it's 12. Like they need to push it earlier. Like if they push it 4 hours earlier, I think it'd be nearly perfect.
It would be super fun because then you'd have like, for most of us in America and Canada, like it would be an enjoyable like nighttime watch instead of like crap. I have to, because we were prepping for a podcast and we needed to do the podcast the next day. I just went to sleep, woke up at 1 a.m. To watch it, and then Sydney just stayed up, and then the next day we were like dying.
Yeah,
obviously
like
it's our decision to do that. But it's still like you said, it doesn't work for Europe very well because like unless you're like going to school late or you don't have a job, because who's gonna like right before their job watch the new episode of the Star Wars thing? I know people that do that.
You'd have to, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
But,
I also think it'd be cool. I don't know if this is possible. I wish the first time an episode played, it would just like play live. You know what I mean? Like, so people could like, that's
like a YouTube premiere.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly like that. Like I was really into, I wasn't really into it, but I remember back when The Walking Dead was popular, it was like a big thing. Like everybody, that show was huge. Same with when Breaking Bad was in its later seasons. Everyone it was like a big thing. I think it was Sunday night for The Walking Dead. I'd be like texting all my friends. It'd be big on social media and Twitter. And it's like The Mandalorian just stealth drops in the middle of the night. Like there's no real hype about it until the next morning. And there's no like, sense of community, which I think would be really fun. Like imagine how exciting Mandalorian season 2 finale would have been if everyone was watching along at the same time and
live tweeting about it. Like
exactly,
the community about that would be, or like just getting in a Discord and hopping on and hanging out and watching it with your buddies. I think that's a great idea.
Totally.
Like I have a podcast that I love listening to, and they'll premiere their episodes on YouTube with the video, and it's so fun to hop into the chats and just be like, okay, let's have a conversation. And usually the hosts will be in there and they'll be responding too, but that's not always the case. But like that opens up a whole, like they could have like a almost like red carpet premiere type thing where they have the first like you said, first episode premiere at a set time, and it make a big event about it.
Yep, totally agree.
But I mean, we're mentioning Andor, we're mentioning Mandalorian. I do want to kind of transition the conversation here, almost like an Andoran review. What did you think about like the whole 12 episode run of Andor?
I thought it was great. Everyone, kind of has the conversation whether it's their favorite show. For me, it's definitely near the top. I really loved Mando season 1. They're very, very different. But yeah, phenomenal show. Pretty much like technically perfect. I don't think there was a single bad acting performance in it. Like, and even Mando 1, you can point out small characters where there's, it's just, it's not the same quality as everyone. With Andor, it's like everyone on Ferrix, even if you don't know their name, like if you don't know Brasso's name, by the time episode 12 comes around, you're still like, okay, that's the guy who had his little act of rebellion in episode 3. He's the guy who's been helping out. He's always around to help Marva. You kind of get the feeling of community, and that only works because everyone is so perfect at what they do. Definitely the best acted Star Wars show. Probably the best like produced and like written Star Wars show. Marva's speech at the end was incredible. Definitely a top 5 Star Wars. I put the application and I get the review episodes, and so I got that one a week early, and like I've never before, I didn't realize there was a limit to how many times you could watch it. I've never hit that, and I actually hit it. They were like, you can't watch this anymore.
Oh my gosh.
You've reviewed it too much.
I reviewed it too much. Yeah, then there were a few really good moments like that. Episode 3, I think, was a real standout, with the kind of ending there where Marva sort of has another speech leading into the great acting by Cyril there, as he's kind of dealing with Andor's BS. And yeah, it's just a really great show. My only minus is I do get a little less excited over new Andor episodes than I would over something like The Mandalorian, because The Mandalorian just kind of hits that quintessential, like, makes me feel like a kid sort of, like, you just get excited. Like I was rewatching Mando season 1 the other day, and I still getting it, like seeing all these planets and all these weird creatures and stuff. That was something, and just kind of the sense of like Western adventure that show has is something that really resonates with me. But I'm happy. I think they both complement each other really well. I wouldn't want only Andor, but I also don't think I'd want only Mandalorian either.
So we've had the conversation a lot. I will go ahead and say that Andor is the best Star Wars that has been produced. Now, that does not mean it is everyone's favorite Star Wars, and that it can't be someone's least favorite Star Wars. But I think objectively, you can look at all the different pieces, directing, writing, cinematography, incorporating different aspects of Star Wars into it. I think it did a very good job with all of these different pieces. I mean, as someone who runs a marketing agency specifically on like the video side of things, like I was drooling so much over all of the cinematography. I mean, just the opening scene to the movie, it's just like, yeah, this show knows what it's going to do. But I think, like you said, there shouldn't just be Andor type of shows, because I think that takes away from the broad experience. Because if you're just doing Andor, you don't get Bad Batch, you don't get Clone Wars, you don't get Rebels, you don't get Mandalorian. So I think I think that's something that I definitely want to get into, is where Mando, where Andor, and all of these different flavors of Star Wars actually take place in the galaxy, and where that's kind of going forward. Yeah,
like for me, I don't think, as much as I love Andor, and for me it's pretty much perfect, it's a 9.5 out of 10. I don't think I'd give it 10 out of 10. for me, it will never quite hit the highs of like, I think it's a better show overall than something like Star Wars Rebels. But for me, because it doesn't have that core element of like myth, it will never reach that moment of like Rebels where Kanan sacrifices himself and he gets his vision back for a moment. Like to me, that is like gets a bit more to the core of what I personally like about the show a bit more. Now, again, that's just, you know, kind of what I personally like, what's special to me. Or like in Mando season 2, I really love the themes of family and fatherhood, especially in Star Wars. You see it, you know, it's probably the theme of the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy, arguably. So like the way that plays into Mando season 2, for example, I thought was really touching. I guess Andor has like, but on the other hand, I really like how Andor has, you know, commentary about like community, which is far too nuanced of a message for you to get in something like even, you know, arguably the best made movie, The Empire Strikes Back, doesn't have time to, you know, really sit down and say, this is, you know, what community is, this is how you fight oppression, all of these things. It's kind of the difference between, you know, the space opera versus the more grounded kind of space drama, I guess, that Andor is.
It's
drama
true,
versus
though.
trauma.
It is true. I was just thinking about it. Like, man, Andor the comedy in it is really like not there. This is a very serious show. And I feel like that's not something that we've really ever seen in Star Wars. Like Star Wars has always put a little bit of humor in there just to keep things light enough. But this was not it. And I appreciate that. But also it does kind of lack that little Star Wars spice, you know, that we usually see. I totally think it's good and we need that in Star Wars, but I could see that it's kind of missing something.
Yeah, totally. Like for me as a kid, like I you know, I've been pretty hardcore on Star Wars since I can remember it, and like the things that I remember most about like watching Star Wars as a kid is like what it felt like when one of the ships flew by and all the perfectly crafted sound effects, and like what it was like going on the Death Star for the first time or in the cantina, where it feels like this really fantastic special world. And like just random things like in one of my memories in the Phantom Menace, seeing the hover tank, like that's so cool. And that's something that you miss in Andor a little bit because it is, you know, but I mean because the show is so thoughtful and careful in how it's made, you also get the Marva payoff, which is probably, you know, a much more well-earned emotional payoff, even than like something like, you know, Kanan sacrifice in Rebels. And not to say that that's cheap or anything, but you know,
they take their time to set it up and guide you to a payoff that makes sense to the characters, and they take the time to make it make sense. So I don't think there's any outcome within Andor that is outside of what the character should or would be making. Like there's no moment within Andor where you're like, oh yeah, they're only making this decision because they need that payoff at the end. It's like, no, this makes sense for the character. It makes sense for Marva not to go with Andor because of her beliefs and wanting to fight the Empire. And then ultimately doing it in such a way that pays off so well. And like I love that moment. As soon as B2 gets knocked over and Brasso just goes to town.
Bricks him, yeah.
So satisfying. But yeah,
that was a great moment.
So I think there's two outcomes here. One, we never see anything like Andor again after Andor season 2. Or there's the second option. I don't necessarily think we'll see more variations of that kind of storytelling within Star Wars, but I think it will influence things. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think we're going to see more of that kind of thing, or it's going to be more of like, oh, people really like this part of it?
It's a tough question because there's like a few variables there, a few kind of sub questions that you need to ask and make a guess on. So like the first one is like, what do the people making the shows ultimately care about more? Do they care about artistic vision, or do they care about just pure success and driving subscribers, or is it somewhere in between?
Yeah.
The second question is, whichever way you go on that, if it's the former and they care, you know, about a show that's different and, you know, brings a new artistic vision, then yeah, I think we will see more. If it comes down to success, I think it's a bit more complicated, and it's not as easy. I think like people talk about viewing numbers, and I think they're a little too flippant with it because, for one, we don't know what the viewing numbers are. For me, anecdotally, as like a content creator, and I'm sure you've noticed this too, there's definitely not the same interest as there is when The Mandalorian came out. Not even close, really. Same with Kenobi. But a show can be successful in other ways. For one, maybe they're targeting a different segment of the audience.
Yeah.
Maybe Andor will get some play around awards time. And maybe it's something that they want to have in their catalog as like a prestige piece. Like, this is an extremely high rated show that makes our catalog look a bit more serious. So I can't really answer whether they'll have more, because I think that question is unknowable unless you're like in the really in the meetings. Yeah. Because even like the Nielsen numbers, those are essentially based on surveys. They're essentially nonsense. The best indicators you can have are looking at like interest trends on Google and things like that. And that indicates that, it's less,
And that's only the digital side of things. Because when Mandalorian was coming out, we have a really strong like tech community around here. Never did I have a discussion about Mando in person. Andor comes out, and literally every time we have like a tech meetup, which is like every week, every single person is talking about the last episode of Andor, and it's just so fascinating to me. Like I ran into someone at Natural Grocers, and they were talking about Andor because they saw this shirt, the Hawaiian shirt, and they're like, "What'd you think about Andor?" And I was like, "Oh, I love it." Like, that's the level of like personal discourse, but you can't judge that on like you said. It depends on what they want, because Obi-Wan was the highest interest show, but I think it's not going to have the legs that Mandalorian's going to have.
Totally. Like, Mandalorian's a cultural phenomenon, basically. Like, you see Baby Yoda everywhere. Like, that's what kind of got my son into Star Wars. And Andor's not going to do that because it can't. So, but that doesn't mean, like, another thing too is you got to consider, like, Mando made, a lot of people might watch Mando, but like, how many people are buying Disney Plus who didn't already have it? Like, Mando probably appeals largely to people who are already really big Star Wars fans and are probably going to be watching one of the 6 Star Wars shows coming out a year. Like, if you're watching Mando, or if you're watching Ahsoka, for example, there's an almost certain chance you're going to watch Mando. Some people will let their subscription lapse at times. Others won't. But so it's a very complex kind of situation. So I don't really know how it's going to work out. I hope we see more. I've always been a fan of like diversity in storytelling. Yeah. That's why I really like Star Wars Visions.
Yes.
And even like, there's this like, I'm not, even though my job, for those who don't know me, I do talk about, continuity and lore and stuff like that. I'm a big fan of like non-canon stories, or like stories that are just stories first and you can worry about the canon later. Yes. So more diversity in storytelling generally, it would be good. So I hope we do see more.
I hope that we get more of like that's what I love about Andor, is Andor takes the root of what George Lucas was saying with A New Hope and the setup of the Empire and the setup of like what was happening politically around that time with Vietnam. You have the colonialism of the Empire. You have all of these huge political side of things. And I love that Andor gets into that. And then, like you said with Mandalorian, like it gets into it shows a good father figure in Star Wars, which is like just a massive feat in and of itself. Period. Just because I mean, hey, Luke, I'm your father. I also killed millions of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. Like I love the father son stuff, especially someone with a new kid. That was what I'm kind of mixed on the sequel trilogy and Episode 8, but I really like, for example, the Yoda scene where like that's probably one of my favorite scenes in Star Wars, where it's like we are what they grow beyond. It's like stuff like that is perfect. And, all these themes are kind of there waiting to be kind of grabbed at, basically.
Speaking on that side of things, and mentioning Mandalorian, what do you think for Mandalorian season 3, man?
I'm really excited. I find it a little frustrating that people soured a bit on the show.
It's like so weird. It just seems like it was like a random thing that just happened. Like all of a sudden everyone loved it, and then there was like a switch that happened where everyone's like, oh no.
What?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very Star Wars Twitter thing where it's like these people aren't really real. Yeah, one of my Yeah. Well, it's just like people don't talk like this in real life.
Yeah. No.
One of my little gripes kind of about Andor and The Mandalorian is people saying that The Mandalorian, especially season 1, has bad writing, which it's like, it doesn't have bad writing. It has different writing. Like The Mandalorian set out to be an episodic serial Western, and it executed that almost perfectly. Is the writing like less about politics, and is it less about interpersonal relationships? Yes, but that doesn't mean it's like objectively worse writing. Now it is probably, maybe it executes what it wants to do worse than Andor. That's fine. But like, just because it's a bit more pulpy than
that's the whole like. That's for me. That's what I love most about it, because I love Westerns, like my favorite genre. Yeah, and I think Westerns paired with samurai films. I mean, there's specific scenes and moments within Mando season 2 which are taken from Yojimbo, which is a Akira Kurosawa movie. It's like totally, like that's fantastic, and that's the whole point of it.
Yeah, and like I don't know if people forget, like Star Wars has become such a cultural like institution that people forget how cheesy it all is. Yeah, like it's
seriously,
it's a farm boy. He's literally saving a princess from a space station called a Death Star. There are Star Destroyers. Like, it's incredibly stupid, and like it's literally off the page of like I'm really into like pulp sci-fi and pulp fantasy, and it fits in with every other Flash Gordon, like anything of that era. The thing that's so magic about it is how well executed it is and how fun the world is. Like, that's like the first Star Wars movie, like the Force is, you know, it's mentioned, but it's not like some deep mythological thing like will become in the next movie. It's just like, you know, Luke can talk to ghosts and shoot his torpedo. Like it's just a thing that happens, kind of. And you know, everything else kind of came later, but what people fell in love with, and what I personally fell in love with, was the world building, the universe, how fun it was. You know, how it's, you know, there's elements of it's just it executes kind of like, you know, the fantastic better than anything else. And that's what Mando did too, with, you know, the volume, which I think also gets a lot of unnecessary hate. I'm also a big Book of Boba Fett fans, but I know a lot of people aren't. But
we recently, Alex and Molly they did the impossible, which was help us find something to really enjoy and appreciate about Book of Boba Fett. Like, within the first 15 minutes, they dropped the bomb on like what they really love in the heart of Book of Boba Fett, and I never really considered it, but it's like someone who's trained as an assassin doesn't want to do that anymore, and that like pure, almost like, I don't want to do this anymore, but it's my default position, and it's going to be hard for me. Like, I really appreciate that. Yeah,
for me, what I never really thought about it that way. I will admit, I'm not a huge fan of the whole series, I guess. Well, I think that's maybe a bit harsh. I really like the whole series, but what I really love is like the first 3 or 4 episodes, where it is, you know, it's very similar to The Mandalorian, and it's very, very well executed. It's basically like a Western. One thing, the complaint that I just do not get is that people say the Book of Boba Fett has bad special effects. I think the Book of Boba Fett has, personally, I would say it's got overall more impressive visual effects than even Andor, because of the scope of what they did. Like with Mos Espa is absolutely incredible. Like if you look at there's these big scenes where you'll get to see Mos Espa off in the distance, and if you pause it and you look, it's like every little street has something going on. Yeah. And then you go down to the street and it matches the scene from the sky. And it's just like little things like that. Like, people are confusing the fact that there was a poorly executed chase scene, which there absolutely was, with like the overall kind of special effects of the show. And like, we see a lot of, like, I think that show relied on some really cool props. I mean, obviously there's things like Max Rebo, but just generally, like the train car in episode 2 or 3 was amazing. Like lots of little things like that. The show early on, I think, pulled off a lot of things well. Kind of went off track a little bit.
Pacing and purpose, I think, are the 2 things that it really struggles with. I think it wanted to do like 5 different things, and they're like, well, let's try to do 5 different things in this one series. But I totally agree, because I hate the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. Like, I despised every single second of watching it. But I really enjoyed the experience of watching Book of Boba Fett. I loved that whole, and it never felt, like you said with the special effects, like I felt every single moment in Obi-Wan where they were on the volume, which was the entire thing. Just felt like a very fancy stage play. You don't feel that. I mean, there are some moments, but you don't necessarily feel it overall that it's like, oh, we're in a stage. Like, no, if like you said, like the wide scope of it, I think they did a good job. And I think they pieced together using the volume, using practical effects, using special effects, using CGI in a really nice way.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, and this is honestly the same with Obi-Wan. I think the bigger issue was with like execution and direction rather than the actual technology itself.
Yeah.
Like that was especially the case with Obi-Wan, which is very poorly lit, very muddled action scenes, not a lot of energy kind of in the whole thing.
Yeah.
And like, that's not a volume issue. Cause like a lot of these issues, a lot of like the poor execution happens in really small spaces where like the volume's not a limitation. Like the first kind of confrontation between Vader and Kenobi, it's lacking a little like energy and emotion, but that's not because of the technology.
Yeah.
Like it's because of decisions made to have it completely in the dark, to have Vader kind of just slowly walking around. Like you didn't need to do that. You just did it.
Yeah, it's like, okay, none of the shots in Kenobi really felt well planned or thought out because they didn't have the time to properly do it. There's so much of that show that should have been edited out, but they get like, well, if we edit out this, it's going to only be like 4 episodes instead of the 6 that we want, when it was originally supposed to be 23 and it was supposed to be a movie and all that. Like all of the problems of Obi-Wan was in the boardroom and not in the actual like volume.
Yeah.
It's like the prequels. The prequels use the blue screen. Like the first one has more practical effects than all of the other movies, but they didn't know how to utilize the blue screen very well. Same with, Attack of the Clones was the one where they tried to really push the boundaries, and they learned a lot.
Yeah, totally.
Where ultimately Revenge of the Sith, like that was like the perfect mesh of the blue screen, CGI, and practical. And I think we're getting into that point where they introduced it in Mando. They used it very sparingly, but they used it quite well. And now we're seeing, okay, well, we can't use it for an entire show now, but we can use it in this aspect. It works really well.
Yeah, no, I agree with pretty much all of that. Like Mando season 2 had lots of really cool environments because, like they were planned, like the water planet with the Mon Calamari with the sweater. Like there were lots of little bits of that planet that felt like they were filmed somewhere real, and I'm almost certain they were not. Same with like pretty much all of season 1. Like even the interior shots are mostly filmed in the volume.
Yeah.
And you like if my dad were to watch the show, or if most people who didn't know the volume existed were to watch the show, I don't think they know that.
Yeah.
That's why anytime like there's that one video that randomly gets back into virality again, where it's like showing behind the scenes of Mando, and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, I never thought about that."
Yeah, totally.
Kind of closing off this episode, but where do you see Mando season 3 going? Because it seems to be they want to do like a lot bigger scope of things, right?
Yeah, I'm of kind of two minds about that. They're definitely going to go bigger scope. It seems like they're going to go kind of Mandalorian fight for the throne. And to me, I wasn't very interested in the Mandalorian when it was announced because I don't find Mandalorians that interesting. Like as a race, like I didn't really. The Clone Wars episodes were kind of a snooze for me. Same with Rebels. Honestly, I thought they were maybe a little bit better. They weren't interested to me. So I'm a little apprehensive about season 3, and I'm bummed that they're going to move away from some of the small scale stuff of season 1. But like, I also wasn't convinced when the show started. So I'm pretty sure it's going to be great. I'm really interested to see how it ties into kind of the other shows going on. And I love the characters. So yeah, I'm very excited, and the trailers so far have been great.
Yeah, I didn't think. I'm curious. I'm just really curious to know. I try not to put any. I've been a little let down in some of these shows, so I'm not putting any hype on any of this. I'm just gonna go in. I'm gonna enjoy myself. That's my goal. Yeah, I definitely think they're gonna go the Mandalorian throne takeover thing route, and we'll see. I'm here for it.
In and of itself, the struggle of going for the capture the throne game of Star Wars Thrones is struggled if you look at it from the perspective of Mandalorian wants to have the throne, but he doesn't. And I think that's where the most exciting thing is going to be, is because he's going to be like, no, here, take it. I don't care.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, we must earn it in battle. He's like, okay, what does that mean? Can I like fall over and just hand it back to you, or like how's this gonna work? Because I'm not gonna die and leave my boy over here.
Right.
Yeah, my child. Yeah.
That's true. That'll be a fun dynamic to just see what this whole race based around fighting and battling and earning and whatnot.
He's the weirdo,
and he's like,
and he's considered the weird guy.
Yeah.
It's like, you guys are fighting over a sword? Like, I just didn't want to take my mask off. What are you guys doing?
Yeah.
But I think with that, thank you all so much for listening to this episode. Justin, thanks for hopping on the podcast. Greatly enjoyed having you.
Glad to. It was great. Great chat.
As always, thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.